Hello YouTube. Today we are going to be going over what each unit does, and we're going to be starting off with Zerg because that is my main race. That is the race I'm most familiar with. So let's get things started. The Zerg main structure is the hatchery, and from the hatchery you get these little things which are larvae, and larva is used to produce almost everything that a Zerg uses. For example, its basic workers, the drones, which of course are used to mine minerals and gas, which we don't see here, but trust me, it exists. And drones are also used to build structures. So every time you want to build a structure, you have to use a drone, and the drone will morph into a structure. The first structure that we are going to be building, and most Zergs will be building, is the spawning pool. So as you can see here, the spawning pool, it's this nasty green looking thing. But this enables the Zerg to produce Zerglings and queens. So let's start off with the queen, because the queen is a unique unit in that it does not require larvae. And that's actually a very important thing to note, because Zergs, you want to use your larvae for drones most of the time. So if you have spare minerals, it's usually a good idea to just make some queens. And out she goes. The queen is the Zerg's kind of macro mechanic, but it does so much more than that. So first, the queen can use spawn larvae. So as you can see right now, this hatchery only has 3 larvae, and that's the cap for now. But once you have a queen, you can use the spawn larva ability and inject onto the hatchery. So as you can see, there's some eggs going on over here. There's this little timer bar, and once this bar completes in 29 seconds, it's going to spawn additional larvae. And that's very important because the Zerg needs that again to produce units. In addition to spawn larvae, the queen can drop a creep tumor. So if you take a look at this gray looking thing, it's purple on the minimap. This provides the Zerg with extra speed. So it's very important for Zergs to spread creep, and that's what it looks like. You drop this little nasty thing and it spreads more of this gray creep. And then from each tumor you can continue spreading, just like that. And now that the larva has finished, we can see that those eggs are gone and we have some extra larvae here. So the queen can continue to do that, keep injecting larvae, and usually it's a good idea for the Zerg to do that every 29 seconds or as soon as they have enough energy. It is worth noting that you can queue up additional injects. So if you have some extra energy on your queen, you can inject it again. So once this one is done, it'll automatically load the next injection. There we go. We see some larva pops, and there are the eggs again for the next one. Now going back to the creep, as I said, most Zerg units get a speed bonus on creep. So for example, the queen right now on this creep, she has a movement speed of 1.31 and in parentheses plus 2.18. So if you want to do some quick math right now, the movement speed of the queen on creep is going to be 3.4 1.49. I hope I did that right. However, if she walks off the creep, you can see she's a lot slower. And if you take a look at that info, she loses that parentheses bonus. So her movement speed is only 1.31 off creep. And most units do get a speed bonus on creep. Drones, however, do not. They are fixed on 3.94, both on and off creep. And that's to prevent Zergs from getting an extra advantage on creep with their hatcheries. The next ability for the Queen is the Transfusion ability. And this instantly heals a target biological unit or structure for 75 life, and an additional 50 life regenerates over 7 seconds. So let's damage this hatchery a little bit so I can demonstrate that ability. And let's see, about 1400, that should be good enough. So right now the hatchery is at 1390. Let's drop in an injection and it heals up, and now it's back to full HP. So that's another good ability to heal up your Zerg units or buildings, and all around a good ability to have, and that makes the Queen a very versatile unit. Not to mention its defensive capabilities. It does 9 damage at a range of 7 against air units, and it does 4 damage for 2 attacks at a range of 5 against ground units. What that means is it attacks twice, each time doing 4 damage, so effectively 8 damage per attack. A lot of times you will see Zerg players get a lot of queens for the defense. They can heal each other with transfusions, and when you don't need them for the defense, you can drop creep tumors, inject your hatcheries. So very useful unit to have, and again, they don't cost larva. Now let's move on to the next Zerg unit, and that's going to be the basic Zergling. Now Zerglings, like most other Zerg units, spawn from larvae, and they spawn 2 at a time. They only cost 50 minerals, so very cheap, and they only cost 1 supply as well. So most Zerg compositions will contain a lot of Zerglings, and Zerglings, they are very fragile. They only have 35 HP, but again, they are super cheap. You get 2 for the price of 1, and they do 5 damage at a weapon speed of 0.5. What this means is every 0.5 seconds they do 1 attack, and that attack does 5 damage. And as you can see, once we move off creep, the movement speed is 4.13. On creep, you get that plus 1.24. So they're faster on creep. And Zerglings can also upgrade them with the metabolic boost, which increases the movement speed of Zerglings.
Research
Let's see what
complete.
that looks like. And look how much faster they are. Off creep gets boosted to 6.58. On creep, 6.58 plus 1.97. So these are very speedy boys. And the next thing, the next structure, is going to be the Baneling Nest. And the Baneling Nest allows your Zerglings to morph into Banelings. So this is a Baneling here. It's got that big bulbous backside. And what the Baneling does is it's pretty much a suicide bomber. It does a lot of damage, especially versus light units. But once it attacks, it dies. Just as we can see here, it does 16 damage, but versus light units, it does 35. So light units are, for example, Zerglings. As you can see, there's that light tag on the bottom. And drones are also light units. So Baneling, when it attacks, it explodes like that. It does splash damage in the area, so anything within that area is going to receive all that damage. So let's take a look at that again. Baneling, once again, gets a movement speed bonus on creep. And when it dies, it does the attack as well. So you don't have to actually attack. If it gets killed by something, it will also explode and deal damage. And of course you can also just run in and attack whatever it is you want to attack. You can also manually explode the Baneling, but it won't do any damage to my own units unless I automatically, or rather manually target them, like so. There we can see this drone took a lot of damage, but it is going to heal up because all Zerg units heal on their own. Moving on, the next Zerg structure is the Roach Warren. The Roach Warren allows the production of roaches. Roaches are a pretty tanky, beefy unit. They have 145 HP. They have 1 armor by default. And they do 16 damage, but they attack rather slowly. As we can see, once again, they get movement speed bonus on creep. They cost 75 minerals and 25 gas, and they cost 2 supply. So roaches, they are pretty supply intensive. They're costing 2 supply, but they're relatively cheap, so easy to mass once again. So sometimes you'll see Zerg players get a lot of roaches to hit a very powerful early timing. Now the Roach Warren also enables roaches to be morphed into Ravagers. The Ravagers, they cost a little extra minerals and gas and supply, but they are much better than roaches in my opinion. Now, as you can see here, it loses the armor tag, it loses a little bit of HP. It maintains the same damage, but has extra range, it attacks a little bit faster, and most importantly, it gains this ability, Corrosive Bile. So Corrosive Bile launches a missile at the target location, dealing 60 damage to all units in the area upon impact. That's what this looks like. It drops a little meteor there, and as you can see, it kind of exploded some of that larva there. It has a relatively short cooldown of 7 seconds, so a very powerful unit. You can get a few of these, launch the biles out, and either deal big damage or force your opponent to move out of the way. Very good, solid unit in the Zerg arsenal. And that pretty much covers the production facilities from the hatchery. And the next thing to note is once you get a spawning pool, you can morph your hatchery into a lair. This is the next tier of the Zerg evolution. And this is going to allow more things to be produced, more researches to be, well, researched. And let's wait for that to complete to see what that looks like. We have mined out of those minerals, but we don't need minerals in this test map. A few other buildings that the Zerg can produce out of the hatchery is the Evolution Chamber, which contains upgrades for Zerg ground units. It can also produce a Spine Crawler, which is the anti-ground defensive structure. You can poke your enemies with that, as well as the Spore Crawler, which is the anti-air defensive unit for the Zerg, which is also a detector. And what that means is it can see invisible units. And the other thing I forgot to mention is the Overlord, which serves as the supply unit for the Zerg. So just giant floating balloons. You can use these to scout around. And they can also drop creep once the layer is done. And they can also morph into overseers, which are also detectors, so they can see invisible units. They can drop changelings, which morph into your opponent's unit. So if you take a look at that, it's a blue zealot. And essentially it's a spy. You can use it to infiltrate your opponent's army and take a look at what they have. So now that our layer is done, that enables these researches. The centrifugal hooks upgrade for banelings, which increases their movement speed and gives them a little bit more HP.
Research
and
complete.
From the Roachworn, we can get Glial Reconstitution, which is roach movement speed. We can also
Research
get
complete.
Tunneling Claws, which enables roaches to move while burrowed.
Research complete.
So Burrow is an upgrade from the hatchery slash layer, and this enables all your
Research
Zerg units to
complete.
burrow into the ground, just like that. And with that Tunneling Claws upgrades, roaches can move while underground. So this can open up a lot of tricky plays, as long as your opponent does not have a detector, such as a Spore Crawler or Overseer. Now, the layer also enables you to build structures such as the Hydralisk Den, which allows you to build Hydralisks, which are light units. They're relatively weak, but they do a lot of damage, 12 damage, relatively quickly at 0.59 seconds. And you can also research the following upgrades: Grooved Spines, which increases Hydralisk attack range by 1, and
Research
Muscular
complete.
Augments, which increases the movement speed.
Research complete.
So now this upgraded Hydralisk has 6 range, and its movement speed 3.94 off creep, which is the same as on creep after you research that upgrade. Once the Hydralisk Den is complete, you can construct the Lurker Den. which allows the Hydralisk to morph into a Lurker. While that is morphing, I will show you the Spire. Let's build it on this side. The Spire allows you to build Mutalisks, which is a flying unit. It is very fast, and it does 9 damage. A relatively short range of 3, but the special thing about the Mutalisk is that its attack bounces to nearby targets up to 3 times. So its first attack will do 9 damage, the second attack will do, I think, 3 damage, and then 1 damage for the final bounce. The Spire also allows you to build Corruptors, which is the Zerg air-to-air unit. It does 14 damage to regular air units, 20 damage to massive air units. And it can also use the Caustic Spray ability, which is an anti-structure ability. Can't use it on your own buildings, but a group of Corruptors can spray down an enemy structure very quickly. Now let's go back to the Lurker. The Lurker is a interesting unit in that you have to burrow into the ground for it to be able to do anything. And it can't move while burrowed, so kind of a siege unit, but it is very powerful. It does 20 damage, and against armored units it does 30 damage. Armored units being something like the Roach. As you can see, pretty significant damage there. And most of the time, they'll have more than one. So the Lurker, a very powerful Zerg unit, and of course it's burrowed, so it's invisible, so it's very hard for your opponent to deal with, and it also does damage in a line. So if your opponent has multiple units, everything in a line will receive that damage. The next building is the Infestation Pit. And the Infestation Pit allows you to make Infestors, which is the first Zerg spellcaster that we will be talking about. And from the Infestation Pit you can research Pathogen Glands, which increases the starting energy of Infestors by 25. You can also research Neural Parasite, which allows Infestors to use the Neural Parasite ability. So let's get both of
Research
those.
complete.
So now the Infestors that we make from this point are going to spawn with extra energy. Fungal Growth is the first ability, and this locks down a group of units in this area, also dealing 30 damage over 3 seconds and slowing the movement speed by 75%. Reveals cloaked and burrowed units, and affected units cannot blink or load into transports or buildings. So that would look something like this. It shoots out a little green ball. It'll hit anything in that area, do some damage, and slow it down. The next ability is Microbial Shroud, which creates a shroud that obscures ground units underneath, reducing damage taken from air units by 50%. And this is a pretty big area. That's what it looks like. Anything in this cloud will receive less damage from air units. So we can see this Ravager, when it was under the cloud, wasn't taking that much damage. Now the cloud is gone, so does take that damage once again. Let's take a look at that once again. Receiving very little damage right now, about 3 per hit. So it's a pretty useful ability against mostly air units. It's very situational, but it can be very strong. And the final ability is Neural Parasite, which takes control of an enemy unit. Don't really have anything to demonstrate that on, but it would, let's see if I can use it on one of these. No, not really. But it can take control of an enemy unit for 11 seconds. That unit effectively becomes yours. It'll fight for you. You can attack it, get rid of your enemy's units. Pretty solid ability, especially against high value targets, such as maybe a Lurker. And Infestors are the only other Zerg unit besides the Roach which can move while burrowed. And you can also cast Neural Parasite while burrowed. The next layer tech building is the Nidus network. This allows the Zerg to load their ground units inside, and then from this structure you can pop out a Nidus worm somewhere else on the map where you have vision, and then you can unload everything that was inside it. So good way to harass at multiple locations. You can pop up in your opponent's base if they're unaware and just unload your units just like that. And then you can retreat back into it, pop back out. So this really boosts the Zerg mobility, which is already very strong. It allows the Zerg to be in multiple locations at once almost. So that covers everything from the lair. The next evolution of the Zerg is the Hive. Now the Hive requires the infestation pit, which we already made, and this allows the Zerg to access their tier 3 units, upgrades, and structures. Now while we wait for that to finish, let's take a look at the upgrades. So let's get each of these upgrades,
complete.
the +1 upgrades. So now it boosts the Queen's armor to 2, boosts her damage, and you can also see that with the Ravager as well as the Roach. Now air units, they get their upgrades from the Spire.
Upgrade complete.
And if we get those upgrades, you can see the boost to the Mutalisk as well as the Corruptor. So now that the Hive is done, this unlocks the following upgrade from the spawning pool: Adrenal Glands, which increases the attack speed of Zerglings by 40%.
Research complete.
So if we take a look at these Zerglings now, their attack speed 0.35 compared to the previous 0.5. So it attacks a lot faster now, and it's a very important upgrade to get if you're going for a Zergling heavy army. This also allows the Spire to morph into a greater Spire. Now while we wait for that to finish, let's take a look at the final Zerg structure, the Ultralisk Cavern. This allows the Zerg to produce these big, beefy boys, the Ultralisks. Ultralisks are the tankiest unit in the game. They have 500 HP. They start with a default 2 armor. Currently it has 3 because we researched the armor upgrade. And they do 38 damage, so that's a lot of damage. But the drawback is the range is only 1, so the Ultralisk has to be right next to its target to attack. And you can see it just slicing away with those big claws at the front of it. The Ultralisk Cavern, you can also research chitinous plating, which gives an additional +2 armor to Ultralisks, boosting them to 4 with 0 upgrades. And if we get all the armor upgrades,
Upgrade complete.
the
Upgrade
Ultralisk will
complete.
have 7 armor, which means it reduces incoming attacks by 7. So if you had something like the Zergling, which only does 6 damage right now, it will do barely any damage to this Ultralisk. So you can see the HP is going down very, very slowly. And on the other end of the spectrum, if the Ultralisk were to attack this Zergling, it just kills it in 1 shot. And the next upgrade from the Ultralisk Cavern is the Anabolic Synthesis, which increases the movement speed of Ultralisks off creep. So currently, on creep, the movement speed is 4.13 plus 1.24. If we move off creep, we lose that bonus. But if we get this research,
Complete.
then the movement speed gets boosted to 4.96 off creep. And we can see that the little wind moving behind it to show you how speedy he gets. But back on creep, we don't really see a difference. Now, the Greater Spire has completed, and this allows the Corruptor to morph into a Broodlord. The Broodlord is the Zerg air assault unit, if you will. Yeah, the flying heavy assault unit. And this shoots broodlings at its target. Broodlings are essentially Zerglings, except they have a timer. So let's see what that looks like. It shoots 2 of these little guys, and they're gonna nibble away at the target. They don't do a lot of damage, but hey, they're free. So the Broodlord, it does 22 damage with the +1 upgrades at a long range of 10. So when these broodlings first make contact, they'll do 22 damage, and then they'll continue to attack with their own little nibbling. It's worth to note that the Broodlord uses air upgrades from the Spire. However, the broodlings use ground upgrades from the evolution chamber.
Upgrade complete.
Now that we've gotten +2, you can see the broodling has been boosted up to 6 damage. The Broodlord is also very good in that it affects the enemy AI. So the enemy units will automatically try to attack the broodlings, which again are free. So it protects your main army. It forces your opponent to manually control and target the broodlords or other units that they would prefer to hit. Now the Hive also enables the following upgrades from the Lurker Den. Adaptive Talons, which reduces the time Lurkers take to burrow, as well as the
Research
Seismic
complete.
Spines, which increases the attack range of Lurkers by 2.
Research complete.
So now, this Lurker, it burrows a lot quicker, and that allows you to reposition very easily and quickly if necessary, and it extends the range to 10. So it allows you to hit things that are pretty far away. So Lurkers absolutely require those 2 upgrades to be utilized to their full potential. And now the final Zerg unit to mention is, oh sorry, not final, because I forgot about the Swarm Host, which is enabled via the Infestation Pit. The Swarm Host, it doesn't attack by itself, however it has this ability, Spawn Locust, which you can use to shoot out these flying locusts, which can then swoop in on a location. And these locusts do a lot of damage, 11 damage, and they attack very quickly, but they are on a timer, so they do explode after a certain amount of time. But if a Zerg were to have a handful of Swarm Hosts, they can send a bunch of locusts at a target and just shoot it down very quickly. Again, this is what that looks like. They shoot 2 of these locusts out, and they do damage very quickly. As we can see, they just shoot. And this beefy Ultralisk, not going to die from that, but did take a good amount of damage. And now let's move on to the final unit, the Viper, which is the second and superior spellcaster in the Zerg arsenal. As you can see, it is a flying unit. It has no attack on its own, similar to the Infestor. However, its utility makes it, in my opinion, one of the best Zerg units. The first ability is Consume, which allows you to drain the HP of a friendly structure, using it to regenerate the Viper's energy. So as you can see, its energy going up. Meanwhile, this Hive's HP going down. And now the Viper has a good amount of energy. Let's see what it can do. Abduct pulls target unit to the location of the Viper. So you can pull a enemy unit or a friendly unit. Generally, you want to use this to attack expensive, high-value units. For example, if your opponent had carriers or battle cruisers, you can just yoink that over so your units can attack it, and it'll look something like this. Yoink! And the next ability is the Blinding Cloud ability, which creates like a green cloud, and anything in this cloud has its range reduced to melee range. So it's very useful for things such as the Lurker, which has long range, or if you're up against a Terran player, a siege tank. And its final ability is Parasitic Bomb, which creates a parasitic cloud that deals 120 damage over 7 seconds to the target and enemy air units nearby. This is a very powerful anti-air ability. It's extra good against massable air units such as Mutalisks, or if you're up against a Protoss, Phoenixes. And what that looks like is, well, I can't use it on my own units. So let's just get a enemy hatchery right here. So now we have an enemy Mutalisk, and if we were to cast that parasitic bomb on it, it would get this little yellow glow. It would take a lot of damage, and this would also damage any additional units next to it. So let's take a look at that again. We'll have to consume some more energy. So let's cast it again, and now we can see both of these units taking damage from that cloud. And even after the first target died, the cloud remained and continued to do damage to the second Mutalisk. So a very useful unit to have, the Viper. It can cast blinding clouds to effectively nullify your opponent's ground units, as well as parasitic bomb, which does similar effect to air units, and of course the abduct ability, which pulls in enemy units or friendly units. And that about covers it for everything the Zerg has in their arsenal. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time for the Protoss edition. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.